Hello, everyone. Welcome to Culture Shock, the podcast where movie lovers and history nerds unite. I'm your host, Luke Schweiss. I've been a passionate film obsessive for my entire 22 years of existence, and I seek to bring a unique mix of academia and history to the film discourse sphere. This week's episode, we're going to be talking about the Oscars, all things Oscars. Most recent Academy Awards ceremony, the 97th ceremony, was just a couple weeks ago, back in the beginning of March, in which we saw Anora take home the biggest awards of the night, 5 Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay. Mikey Madison won Best Actress. I think there's also Best Editing for Sean Baker as well in there. Brutalist also took home 3 Oscars. Adrien Brody won for Best Actor. And, I will say, this was the first Oscar ceremony that I had watched in several years. And the first one that I had enjoyed in God knows how long. I think a big portion of that had to do with Conan and finally getting the hosting gig. Very well deserved, and he did a great job. The ceremony was really well done, and I think it was just nice to get a new face in there and not have Jimmy Kimmel for like the 5th year in a row or whatever it is. But I saw that they're already bringing him back for next year's ceremony, so they must have liked what he did with it quite a bit. I mean, the ratings were up from last year, and that's pretty remarkable considering that there was no Barbie or Oppenheimer audience draw for this year's ceremony like there was last year's ceremony. I mean, the biggest movie nominated for this year was Dune Part 2, but that didn't really get any other major nominations outside of like the technical awards. Just that Best Picture nomination. But that's going to be kind of the focus of this episode, is actually the ratings of the ceremony and just kind of how the ceremony has evolved over time with relevancy and how the format has changed, how we as movie lovers take in and consume new movies, and what movies are getting recognized by the Oscars and how that's changed over time, what movies are being nominated, and overall, what are the Oscars doing right? What could they continue to work on? Is this award ceremony ever going to be as relevant as it was back in like the 90s, at the peak of its popularity? Those are all kind of interesting questions that we'll be focusing on today. It's very interesting to look at the ratings over the past 20 years and see the slow decline in the popularity of the award show. There was a time, really mainly in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, where they were averaging, a consistent 40 million audience viewership number. And in the 90s, that was even more consistent. You had the big record year in 1997 with 57.2 million viewers. That was obviously because of Titanic being the big movie of that year, and really the biggest movie ever made up until that point. So that was obviously the defining factor of why that particular year was so popular and drew so many people in. And that formula, or I guess that kind of type of blockbuster movie, was so influential into the other movies that would get recognition going into the 2000s, like the Lord of the Rings movies, those being very popular, very successful. Return of the King, in particular, winning 11 Oscars and being one of the biggest movies of that year, as well as going to 2009, you have movies like Avatar, James Cameron again, the highest grossing movie ever up until that point. And those were really hallmarks of the success of the 2000s. And in the 2010s, you kind of see the landscape of Hollywood changing. You see the introduction of streaming services. You see the development of more movies, more Hollywood studios starting to push their movies onto streaming services. That isn't really until, like, I would say the mid 2010s going into like the late 2010s where you actually see streaming service movies like being nominated for awards. But it was building up to that point. 2014, the ceremony in 2014 was really the last big Oscar ceremony. It was the last one to ever crack that 40 million threshold. And ever since then, just been slowly and slowly getting worse and worse. Pandemic year of 2021, they did have a ceremony that year, and they got 10 million viewers according to Nielsen, and it's the lowest viewed Oscar ceremony in history since they started tracking the viewership numbers. And what's really interesting is I think the pandemic obviously accelerated or exasperated this trend for what types of movies were actually pulling people in, and what was interesting or compelling for the new kind of younger generation of movie audiences. And the pandemic obviously changed a lot of how people view movies now, and what going to the movie theater means, and that's kind of a whole different topic for another day. But it really made things 10 times worse for in the context of the Oscars, of trying to get people interested in a ceremony about, highlighting the best movies of that particular year. And a large portion of people are online talking about, I haven't heard of half of these movies that are nominated, or I've only heard of two or three movies that are nominated this year, and I haven't seen any of the rest of them because they're all exclusively on a streaming service that I'm not subscribed to, or they aren't on anything. They're not on any streaming service. I can't rent it anywhere, and they're not in a movie theater playing near me. So some of these movies are just so difficult to actually get access to, and I think that's really more attached to just the evolving landscape of how people are consuming movies now. And it's not like how it used to be 20, 25 years ago, with the traditional movie release being streamlined into movie theaters. And it's really changed a lot with the types of movies that are being nominated. I mean, in the mid 2010s, you kind of see this slow decline in ratings, and I think that's a part of it, on top of the obviously numerous controversies that were going on during that time about lack of diversity in the nominees, and lack of non-white people being nominated, lack of women being nominated. And the Oscars have obviously seen those complaints and seen those protests and boycotts, and I think have done a better job of being more inclusive and trying to highlight people that are not from the traditional American movie making background. And I think, yeah, I just think it's looking very grim for the future of the Oscars. I don't know if this is really about the ceremony anymore in terms of the decline in ratings. It's not really something that the ceremony can address anymore, because the landscape of how people consume movies, and how they hear about movies, and what actually gets them to go out of their house these days to go to the movie theater and, immerse themselves in something that is, a big Hollywood movie or a big blockbuster movie. It's just rare. You don't really see that impact as much as you did in the 20-25 years ago. Um, I mean, last year's ceremony, you had the big hitters with Oppenheimer and Barbie, both billion-dollar movies. The biggest movies of that year, the whole Barbenheimer phenomenon during the summer of 2023. And that didn't really shift much of rating success for that year. I mean, it went up 2 million in comparison to the previous year. And it's it's looking very grim, very depressing for how this ceremony maintains relevancy and interest. I just think we're entering a new era of filmmaking in terms of things being locked into different spheres of streaming services, and it's just becoming harder and harder to know about what are the biggest movies, or what are the most critically acclaimed movies, and like where can I watch them. You have to seek out that information for yourself individually if you are someone that is interested in that sort of thing. So yeah, it's very interesting to see where this will go in terms of what future ceremonies look like, and whether or not they introduce new categories and completely revamp things, or keep it as traditional as possible. I really don't exactly know where this will end up in the future, but it does not hold the weight that it used to, which I think in some ways is kind of sad. But for me, I've never held that much attachment to the Oscars, and whether or not a movie has a lot of Oscar wins has never been a major factor in whether or not I actually watch that movie. So I do like to see movies that I really enjoy get recognition, but it's not something that makes or breaks my individual love for a movie. But we'll continue more on this subject perhaps in a future episode. Thank you for listening. That does it for today on Culture Shock. Be sure to give us a follow and turn those notifications on for immediate updates about future episodes. Also, if you like what I do here, give our social media pages a follow. That's at Culture Shock Podcast on all platforms. As always, thank you for tuning in.